At 5:47 a.m. on August 8, 1941, 24-year-old Lyudmila Pavlichenko pressed herself behind a pile of wreckage in Beloleka, Ukraine, and watched. 40 meters to her left, a Soviet soldier crouched, unaware that a German sniper had him in their sights. Lyudmila was a history student turned soldier. 4 months in the Red Army, no confirmed kills yet, but already carrying the weight of what was coming. The Wehrmacht had thrown 3 divisions at Odessa, roughly 150,000 men pushing forward, and the Soviet lines were outgunned and outnumbered about 3-1. She'd volunteered for the sniper unit at a moment when men were dying faster than replacements could be trained. That morning she'd already been on the front for 6 hours. No sleep, no food, only a Mosin-Nagant rifle, 40 rounds, and a fierce, furious resolve. 11 days earlier, her university in Kyiv had been bombed. 73 students were dead. Her professor, Dr. Anatoly Vulov, her best friend Natasha, out of the library when the flames ate the building. When the recruiter suggested she train as a nurse, "Women belong in medical units," he said. She told him she'd been shooting since she was 14. She'd scored top marks in a youth shooting club and placed high in regional competitions. The officer smirked. "Target practice," he scoffed, "isn't the same as combat. Combat had blood and noise and fear, things women supposedly couldn't handle." Lyudmila asked to be tested. He pointed a rifle at a fence post 100 meters away. She sent 5 rounds straight through the center. The laughter stopped. She was assigned to the 25th Rifle Division as a sniper. Now, months later, she watched the German helmet through a crack in a ruined farmhouse wall. The enemy sniper about 280 meters out, tracking the soldier who didn't know he was already marked. The soldier was Sergeant Dmitry Kravchenko, 32, married, father of 2, a man who had shared his bread with Lyudmila the day before when she hadn't eaten in 18 hours. He was about to die. Without even knowing why, Lyudmila didn't think of killing as a moral act in that moment. Her instructor's words ran through her mind like a cold calculation. Don't think about murder, solve the problem. Distance, wind, movement. It's math, not hatred. A light crosswind from the west. 280 meters. The target wasn't moving. She dialed for windage, centered the crosshairs on the crack where the helmet showed, and squeezed the trigger. The Mosin-Nagant kicked into her shoulder. The crack of the shot cut through the morning. Through the scope, she watched the German helmet jerk and vanish. Kravchenko looked around in confusion without understanding what had saved him. Lyudmila chambered a second round and scanned the ruins. No movement, no immediate reply. She had made her first kill. She didn't feel triumph or guilt. The first emotion was a blunt, practical question. Where's the next one? That day, August 8, 1941, was only the opening chapter. By May 1942, Lyudmila Pavlichenko would be credited with 309 confirmed kills, including dozens of enemy snipers, a number that would make her the most lethal female sniper in history. The tactic that let her rack up so many victories, however, ran directly counter to everything Soviet doctrine taught. She learned to use herself as bait. Before Lyudmila developed those methods, she watched good snipers die doing everything by the book. Lieutenant Anna Morozova, killed on August 19, 1941, was a textbook marksman with 47 confirmed kills. Soviet solicit. Find concealment, take your shot, move to a secondary position at once, never linger more than 30 minutes in one place, fire no more than 3 rounds from the same location, never engage without a clear escape route. Morozova followed each rule. She took elevated positions in a ruined apartment, planned 2 exits, picked her shots cleanly, and then, moving down to her tertiary position, was cut down by a counter-sniper firing through a stairwell window. She never saw the man who shot her. Following the rules didn't protect her. That was the terrible pattern Lyudmila watched repeat. Skilled German counter-snipers like Hans Becker tracked Soviet shots, predicted movement, and set up interceptions. Becker specialized in hunting snipers. He was precise and patient. On August 27th, a young corporal named Viktor Stepanov, just 19, with 11 kills in 6 weeks, took textbook measures in a drainage ditch and still died when German artillery zeroed in on his firing point. The enemy observed the shot, estimated the position, and saturated the area with explosives. By September, Lyudmila had seen 7 snipers fall, each one following doctrine to the letter, and each one killed because that predictability made them vulnerable. It was clear the issue wasn't marksmanship. Soviet shooters could hit a target. The problem was how they fought, passively, waiting for targets to appear, never forcing the enemy to act. German snipers didn't wait. They created opportunities, forced Soviets to reveal themselves, and then struck. Lyudmila realized that if she wanted to survive, she would have to reverse the whole dynamic. Stop being prey and become the predator. Never fire more than 3 shots from the same spot. Always have an exit plan. Those were the golden rules for every Soviet sniper, and Lieutenant Anna Morozova followed them to the letter. She had set up on the 3rd floor of a bombed-out apartment building. Perfect vantage point, clean lines of sight, and 2 escape routes already mapped out. When she spotted a German machine gun crew about 320 meters away, she took aim. 1 shot, efficient. She then moved to her secondary position on the target, a German officer about 280 meters out. Another clean hit, but as she began to relocate to her final position on the ground floor, a single shot rang out through the stairwell window. It hit her square in the chest. She died before the medics could reach her. The sniper who killed her had been waiting, tracking her every move, anticipating exactly where she'd go next. Morozova never even saw him. That sniper's name was Hans Becker, a marksman with 89 confirmed kills, a master at hunting other snipers. He studied their patterns, predicted their relocations, and intercepted them with deadly accuracy. He understood the Soviet playbook inside and out, and that made his job easy. Soviet doctrine demanded precision and order, but to Becker that predictability was the easiest thing in the world to exploit. Lyudmila Pavlichenko had been in the same building that day, 1 floor below. She heard the gunshot. She heard Morozova's body hit the floor. Then she heard the Germans laughing. They knew they'd taken down another Soviet sniper. Only 10 days later, Lyudmila lost another comrade, 19-year-old Corporal Viktor Stepanov. He'd been a sniper for just 6 weeks, but already had 11 confirmed kills. Bright, eager, disciplined, and doomed. That morning he dug himself into a drainage ditch about 400 meters from the German lines. His positioning was perfect, low profile, excellent concealment, exactly how the manual described it. At dawn he spotted a German patrol. 2 quick shots, 2 dead men. The rest of the Germans scattered, diving for cover. Stepanov did everything right. He stayed down, waited 15 minutes, then prepared to move to his backup position. That's when a German artillery shell landed directly in his ditch. The explosion obliterated him completely, nothing left to bury. The Germans hadn't seen him, they didn't need to. They'd triangulated the source of his shots, calculated where he was likely hiding, and called in artillery to level the entire area. His aim was perfect. His concealment was flawless. His discipline was textbook, and none of it mattered. By the end of September, Lyudmila had watched 7 Soviet snipers die, all of them following the same rules, all of them dying for it. The Germans had studied Soviet sniper doctrine. They knew exactly where they'd hide, how long they'd wait, and which direction they'd move after each shot. Fighting by the book had become a death sentence. Lyudmila started studying every engagement, every death. The pattern was always the same. A Soviet sniper takes a shot, the Germans trace the sound or flash, and within minutes artillery or a counter-sniper responds. The Soviet sniper either dies or is forced to retreat. The problem wasn't skill. Soviet marksmen could shoot as well as anyone. The problem was mindset. They waited for opportunities instead of creating them. They let the enemy dictate the pace. German snipers, especially the experienced ones like Becker, didn't wait. They hunted. They forced mistakes. They manipulated their opponents into revealing themselves. Lyudmila realized she had to flip the script. Stop being the hunted. Start being the hunter. But that meant breaking every rule she'd been taught. Soviet doctrine was clear. Concealment was life. Exposure meant death. Never reveal your position. Never bait the enemy. But in practice, concealment was exactly what the Germans expected, so Lyudmila came up with an idea so reckless it bordered on suicidal. She would make herself the bait. The plan was simple but terrifying. She'd create 2 sniper nests, one real, one fake, just a few meters apart, close enough that she could move between them in under 3 seconds. In the decoy nest, she'd prop up a helmet on a stick or a sleeve stuffed with straw. something that looked convincingly human from a few hundred meters away. Then she'd wait, hidden in the secondary nest, her rifle aimed toward the German lines. When a German sniper took the shot, she'd have only a few seconds, maybe 2 or 3, to spot the muzzle flash, locate her enemy, and fire back before they realized they'd been tricked. If she missed, she'd be exposed and dead. If she hit, she'd vanish, reset the trap, and do it again. It was madness. If her commanders found out, she'd be court-martialed. No one in their right mind would deliberately expose their position in open combat. But Lyudmila had already buried too many friends who'd played it safe. So on the morning of September 3rd, 1941, she tested her plan. She set up inside a ruined cellar close to the front. One position had the decoy, a helmet perched on debris, angled as if someone was watching through a scope. 5 meters to the right, she lay hidden in her real nest, completely still, crosshairs aimed where she believed a German sniper would take cover. 45 minutes passed. Nothing. Her muscles cramped. Her eyes burned from staring through the scope. Flies and ants crawled across her fingers, but she didn't move. Then, at 6:17 a.m., a single shot cracked through the silence. The helmet in the fake nest snapped backward. Someone had taken the bait. Lyudmila scanned the German lines. There, a flash, a shape shifting behind a crumbled wall roughly 320 meters out. She had 3 seconds. Her breath steadied, her finger tightened. She fired. The figure dropped instantly. She didn't wait to confirm the kill. She grabbed her gear, moved 40 meters west, and disappeared into another ruined building before the Germans could react. The plan had worked. For the first time, Lyudmila Pavlichenko wasn't following doctrine. She was rewriting it. Through her scope, she watched the crumbling wall where the shooter had been. Moments later, 2 German soldiers dragged a body past the rubble, verification of a kill. That first experiment wasn't a fluke. Over the next 6 weeks, she sharpened the trick into a refined tactic, timing, decoy placement, and an almost obsessive study of enemy habits. She noticed patterns everywhere. German snipers preferred height, 2nd and 3rd floors, towers, rooftops. They avoided ground-level hides because artillery crews usually zeroed in on those. They liked to keep the sun behind them when possible, and during daylight they rarely moved. Lyudmila used every predictable choice against them. She put her faux positions where elevated shooters would spot them, ran operations when the light favored the Germans' eyes, and kept her real firing nests low and unexpected. Every encounter became a game of angles. The fake target lured the shot. Their muzzle flash revealed a position. Her return fire ended the hunt. By October, her list of confirmed kills had grown to 78, and 22 of those were enemy snipers. Word spread fast. Units that had cowered under sniper fire, commanders who'd lost platoons begged her to come clear dangerous sectors. Men showed up at her post carrying whatever they had. Bottles of vodka, extra rations, whispered please. One commander, a lieutenant named Vulov, came with a different kind of desperation. His platoon had lost 9 men in 4 days to a sniper who stalked a railway junction, firing from different, unpredictable angles and killing anyone who mattered, officers, radio operators, machine gunners. His men wouldn't move in daylight anymore. She accepted, not for the rewards, but because she remembered the faces of Morozova and Stepanov and the others. For 2 days she watched from far away with binoculars, mapping sight lines, counting buildings, measuring distances, noting wind and light. The enemy was clever. He never shot from the same spot twice, but he still had to be somewhere the moment he fired. Lyudmila picked out 11 possible hides and realized she couldn't watch them all at once. She would have to force him to show himself. She planted a decoy 5 meters from where Vulov's men gathered, shaping it to look like an officer standing where he would be visible from most of the suspected positions. Then she hid a dozen meters away, rifle trained on the most likely angle. For 40 minutes she stayed motionless while her legs cramped and her back ached. At 7:11 a.m. the decoy's helmet spun away. A muzzle flash answered the bait. From her scope she read the movement, a shape inside a ruined boxcar, about 420 meters out. It was an unlikely spot, exposed to Soviet artillery, but the German had wagered the shelling wouldn't bother a single boxcar. He was wrong. She adjusted for distance and wind, watched the figure shift inside the car, and fired. The first round hit the man. He stumbled but didn't fall. Lyudmila chambered another round and ended it. Vulov's men cleared the car and found a sniper with a logbook listing 67 confirmed kills. When Vulov asked how she'd known where to shoot, she gave the blunt answer. She hadn't. She made him reveal himself and then killed him. He called it courage or madness. It was probably both. News of her effectiveness made her a target of propaganda and terror. German units placed bounties on the Russian girl. First 100 Reichsmarks, then 500, then 1,000. Enemy broadcast called her a demon, an invention, a man in disguise. The scorn was proof that she had become something that unsettled them. They couldn't accept that a woman could single-handedly reshape the battlefield. Lyudmila found the rumors almost funny. Fear made the enemy sloppy, and sloppiness produced openings. She began to leave small tokens at the scenes of her victories. A ribbon tied where she'd been. A playing card laid on a dead sniper's chest. Soldiers nicknamed her the Red Queen of Death, and the image caught on. Propaganda seized the nickname. Newspapers printed stories that blurred the woman and the myth. But those who fought beside her remembered the real thing. A soldier who took risks because the rules were killing her friends, who rewrote tactics out of necessity, and who refused to accept predictable death as the only option. The crack came before she felt it, a bullet so close that the air around Lyudmila's head seemed to tear. It skimmed past, lifting the hair at her temple. She didn't flinch back. She dove left toward the rifle she'd stashed 4 meters away, slammed into the rubble, and grabbed the stock with hands that knew the weapon by feel. Muscle memory took over. She swung the barrel up toward the ruined bell tower and looked through the scope. There, on the 3rd floor, a shape was sliding back from an opening. The shooter had taken his shot and was shifting to cover. Lyudmila had maybe 2-3 seconds before he melted into shadow. There wasn't time to fiddle with long calculations. Her training narrowed to one pure instinct: point, breathe, fire. The Mosin kicked. Through the scope the figure jerked and stumbled, then dropped into the darkness. She didn't move. She waited, chambered another round, kept the crosshairs tight on the tower opening. 3 minutes crawled by in silence. No return fire. Either she'd hit him, or he was playing the same game and waiting for her to expose herself again. She had learned that the sniper who moved first was often the one who died first. After 10 minutes, infantry began to stir. A clearing party cautiously entered the church. Sergeant Boris, the recon officer who had helped her map the sector, climbed to the tower opening and called down, "All clear." Target down. Lyudmila let out the breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from the sudden drop of adrenaline. She had made herself bait, taken an impossible shot under impossible pressure, and won. When soldiers went up to recover the body, they found a well-equipped German sniper slumped on the 3rd floor, a Mauser K98 with a Zeiss scope across his chest. The rifle showed custom tweaks. The man's position had been textbook: concealment, sightlines, escape routes. In his coat pocket was a small notebook, meticulous entries, names, dates, distances. The pages listed scores of kills. Reports later put that tally at around 94. Whether his name was exactly as recorded in Soviet reports, or later historians debated the exact letters, the fact remained. A single enemy sniper had terrorized that sector, and Lyudmila had ended him by turning herself into a target. She did it the same way she had taken down the railway sniper weeks earlier, forced the hunter to reveal himself, then take the shot. That approach, deliberate exposure, paired nests, fake positions, careful study of sun angles, and likely hides, was exactly what Soviet doctrine condemned. But doctrine had been killing her comrades. She answered with a new logic: if predictability meant death, create unpredictability. As her list of confirmed kills grew, so did the legend. Newspapers and radio broadcasts spun stories about a woman who taunted German snipers before killing them. Some called her a demon or a myth. Others labeled her a symbol. She didn't correct the tall tales. Let them talk, she seemed to say. Let the enemy fear a ghost if that makes them sloppy. Fear produced mistakes. Mistakes produced openings. Openings produced kills. The price for that effectiveness was attention. German commanders placed bounties on her head that climbed as her body count rose. 100 Reichsmarks, then 500, then 1,000. Propaganda outlets seethed, their announcers sneering that no woman could possibly rack up so many kills. She must be an invention, or a man in disguise. Inside the lines, soldiers began to pin small tokens where she'd struck: a ribbon tied in the grass, a playing card laid over a fallen sniper's chest, the Red Queen of Death. Troops fed the myth because myths change how people move. If the enemy believed in a monster, they made mistakes. By October, her confirmed total reached 78, 22 of those enemy snipers. Unit coming to her with desperate requests arrived in mid-October after his platoon lost raiding near a railway junction. The man picked officers and radio operators, sometimes from different angles, then vanished. His men refused to move in daylight. They were paralyzed by terror. Lyudmila accepted the mission. For 2 days she watched the junction through binoculars from nearly a kilometer away, mapping sightlines, counting buildings, noting where the sun helped the shooter and where the wind narrowed. The enemy was cautious, changing positions constantly. He never shot from the same place twice, but a shooter who fires must be somewhere at the moment of the shot. Lyudmila identified 11 possible hiding spots and realized she could not guard all of them. She would have to make the man show himself. She planted an officer-looking decoy inside the visible zone and then lay waiting a dozen meters away. The decoy stood exposed for 40 minutes under the chill morning light. Then a rifle cracked, the helmet spun. A flash answered the bait. The gunman was inside a ruined boxcar, a strange choice because it was vulnerable to artillery. The German had calculated that command wouldn't waste shells on one car. He'd been wrong. Lyudmila adjusted and fired. The first shot wounded him, the second ended the fight. In his coat they later found a logbook listing 67 confirmed kills. After that mission, word of her methods spread across the front. Some troopers called it courage, some called it madness. Either way, it worked. Soldiers who had been frozen by terror began to move again, to hold positions without waiting for orders. Her tactics changed the local psychology of the battlefield. The cost of the campaign accumulated physically and mentally. She was wounded multiple times. Shrapnel from mortar bursts and near misses left cuts and concussions. An airburst in February tore into her leg. Then, in June 1942, a mortar fragment struck her face during counter-battery fire, damaging an eye, fracturing her jaw, and leaving permanent scars. Medics feared for her life, but surgeons saved her. The wounds ended her time at the front. By that point, her confirmed total: 309 kills between August 1941 and May 1942. Many were officers. Soviet Commission for Propaganda and Record-Keeping had witnesses and recovered documents to back the numbers. The tally made her too valuable to risk. She fought the decision. She argued she could still shoot, that the front needed experienced snipers. Orders are orders, her commanders told her. Instead of letting her stay and fight, they sent her on a tour, Moscow first, then Britain and the United States. The Soviets had a dual aim: to boost domestic morale and to show their allies that Soviet women were fighting and dying like men. For Lyudmila, the tour felt like being paraded rather than honored. She was a soldier, not a celebrity, but she complied. In Moscow, she received the nation's highest honors and became the first woman awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union. Newspapers framed her as Lady Death or the Red Queen. In London, she met political leaders. In Washington, she shook hands with the First Lady and spoke at rallies across the country. American headlines called her the most dangerous woman in the world. Skeptics in military circles doubted her numbers. U.S. intelligence later cross-checked German casualty reports and found the figures plausible. Still, she left the tour exhausted. Hundreds of speeches, thousands of photographs, and a growing sense that the war she'd been pulled from had moved on without her. Back home, her role shifted to training. From 1943 onward, she taught at multiple sniper schools across the Soviet Union, instructing hundreds of recruits in the dual nest setup, decoy placement, and the mental habits of an effective hunter. Her students included marksmen who later made their own names in battles like Stalingrad. The tactics she refined were absorbed into formal doctrine. Instead of a sole emphasis on passive concealment, Soviet sniper training began to teach aggression, deception, and psychological pressure as tools of survival. By 1944, the figure of the Soviet sniper had changed. They hunted more, survived longer, and created a new generation of veteran marksmen who could pass lessons forward. After the war, the realities of what she had done sat heavily on her. She said she never enjoyed killing. She maintained that each shot haunted her, and that she remembered the faces behind every sight picture. She married twice, had a son, and lived much of her post-war life away from the front lines in Kyiv, the same city whose university had once been bombed. When she died in October 1974, she was 58. The state held a formal funeral. The official record remembered her as Lyudmila Pavlichenko, Soviet sniper, hero of the Soviet Union, credited with 309 confirmed kills. Outside the Soviet Union, her story faded from popular memory during the Cold War. Inside it, she was a legend, taught in schools, featured in books and films. But the part of her story that mattered most, the practical innovation that cost lives and saved others, was often blurred by propaganda and myth. Her methods, deliberate exposure, decoy use, and aggressive counter-sniping, survived as tactics divorced from the woman who developed them. Today, elements of those ideas appear in modern counter-sniper training, taught in different forms by a range of militaries. If you visit the Central Museum of the Armed Forces in Moscow, you can still see the Mosin nagant she used, displayed behind glass with the personalized marks that tell of long use. There's a photograph beside it of a young woman in ruins, rifle in hand and eyes set with a stubborn resolve. That look, the exhausted, determined gaze of a person who chose to break the rules because the rules were killing her people, is perhaps the truest part of her legacy. She did not invent war. She taught an army a different way to survive it. Her life was one of choices made in impossible circumstances, to risk exposure so others could live, to trade safety for action, to become a figure both feared by the enemy and celebrated by those she defended. The tactics she pioneered changed doctrine and saved lives, but they also left her with memories that never left her. That complicated legacy, of innovation born from grief, of leadership carved from necessity, is what endures when the headlines fade and the medals tarnish. The crack came before the pain. A rifle report so close it felt like a hand brushing her hair. The round zipped past Lyudmila's head. The gust it made lifted the hair at her temple. She didn't flinch away. She rolled left toward the rifle she'd left 4 meters back, slammed into the rubble and snatched the stock as if it were always hers. Muscle memory took over. She swung the barrel, peered through the sights, and found the opening. On the 3rd floor of the ruined bell tower, a figure was sliding back from an aperture, reshuffling into shadow after firing. Lyudmila had seconds, maybe 3, before the man disappeared. There was no time for long-range math. She tightened her grip and fired from instinct. The Mosin kicked. The figure jerked, staggered, and fell into the darkness. She stayed low, heart pounding, chambered another round, and watched the tower opening. 3 minutes crawled by with nothing. No return shot, no movement. Either she had struck true, or the German was pulling the same game and waiting for her to move first. She had learned the hard rule of sniping in that theater. The shooter who breaks the stillness first often pays with their life. After 10 minutes, the morning changed. Soldiers began emerging. Men moved toward the church with rifles ready. Boris's clearing team went up into the tower, and minutes later he popped his head into the opening and signaled all clear. Target down. Confirmed kill. Lyudmila let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sudden drop of adrenaline. She had made herself bait, taken an impossible shot under unbearable pressure, and lived to see it end. When troops searched the tower, they found a German sniper slumped on the 3rd floor. His Mauser K-98 lay across his chest, with the Zeiss scope still warm. The position had been perfect. Concealment, sightlines, escape routes. In his coat pocket was a notebook with meticulous entries, names, dates, distances. Soviet reports later attributed roughly 94 kills to him. Historians still argue over details and names, and some suggest the enemy ace may have been a composite used for propaganda. That debate does not change the fact that a single lethal shooter had terrorized an entire sector, and Lyudmila stopped him by stepping into the open. Between August 1941 and May 1942, she accumulated 309 confirmed enemy kills. Of those were snipers. Nearly 200 were officers and NCOs. The remainder were infantry, machine gunners, and artillery spotters. Each claim was verified by witnesses or captured enemy paperwork. Soviet command insisted on proof before they recorded a number that would be used for morale and posterity. She employed the bait approach in at least 60 documented engagements. Some veterans remembered more. Records from the siege of Sevastopol are incomplete. Many reports were lost when the city fell, but survivors. Memories preserve the image of a woman who stood out in the open and turned hunters into the hunted. Her service came at a cost. Wounds accumulated over months of frontline duty. In September 1941, shrapnel from a mortar grazed her arm and shoulder. A field dressing and a bandage, and she was back at her post the next day. In December, a near artillery hit knocked her unconscious for 2 minutes. She refused evacuation and returned once she could. In February 1942, fragmentation from an 88mm airburst tore through her calf. Medics patched her, and 3 weeks later she walked back into battle. Then in June 1942, a mortar fragment found her face. Shrapnel scarred her cheek, damaged an eye, shattered her jaw. Blood was everywhere. Surgeons thought at first she might not survive the shock. They saved her. Field surgeons stabilized her. A military hospital in Sevastopol repaired the worst of the damage and preserved her sight. The injuries left permanent marks, though. Scars, a changed face, and an end to active frontline service. By then, the number of confirmed kills and the publicity around her made the command's decision inevitable. Lyudmila was too valuable, too symbolic, and too dangerous to risk further. In July 1942, at 25 years old, after 11 brutal months at the front, 4 wounds, and 300 off the lines, her injuries left a visible map across her face, but she lived. That survival forced a command decision. She had become too valuable, too visible, too useful as a symbol to risk at the front. With 309 confirmed kills by mid-1942, more than any Soviet sniper at that point, and a total most marksmen wouldn't reach in a lifetime. The risk of losing her was a political and moral problem, not just a military one. Better to pull her away from the trenches and put her on stage. So in July 1942, at 25, after 11 months of frontline fighting, 4 wounds, and no sign of faltering nerve, she was ordered off the line. She argued, fiercely, that she could still fight, that the front needed veteran snipers, that her injuries were survivable. But orders were final. Instead of bullets and ruins, she was sent on a goodwill tour, Moscow first, then Britain, then the United States. The mission was blunt: show the Allies that Soviet forces were holding, and that Soviet women were fighters too. For Lyudmila, it felt like a punishment disguised as honor. She was a soldier, not a celebrity, but she complied. Moscow in August 1942 brought medals and headlines. She met party officials and received the Hero of the Soviet Union, the first woman ever to earn that title. Newspapers ran her story across the front page. Radio talks called her names like Lady Death. She spoke plainly about her methods: decoys, twin nests, timing, the art of making hunters reveal themselves. Military planners listened and took notes. Her field innovations began seeping into training manuals. By 1943, her tactics had been formalized. Sniper schools started teaching more aggressive psychological techniques, how to force the enemy into mistakes instead of waiting for targets to appear. The doctrine shifted from pure concealment to controlled aggression. That change rippled. Over 1943 to 45, Soviet snipers became more lethal and, letting experience, Soviet snipers began as one woman's gamble reshaped how an army fought. In Britain, she met leaders. In the United States, her overseas trip in late 1940, arranging speaking events from New York to San Francisco. American papers, critics, and military circles grumbers were propaganda, but U.S. intelligence later cross-checked German casualty records and found the totals credible. Still, the tour left her exhausted: hundreds of speeches, endless photographs, a life turned public when she just wanted to return to the fight. She came home in early 1943 and was assigned to train new snipers. From Leningrad to Moscow to Kyiv, she taught hundreds how to build two-nest systems, set convincing decoys, read enemy routines, and think like the hunter. Some students became legends in their own right. Others became trainers who spread the techniques further. By 1944, the Soviet sniper had been remade. No longer merely hidden shooters, but hunters who used deception and psychology as weapons. The change saved thousands. After the war, the cost was visible in scars and quieter in memory. She said she never took pleasure in killing, that every face seen through the scope stayed with her. She married twice, raised a son, and lived out most of her life in Kyiv, the city that had sent her to war when one of its universities burned. On October 10, 1974, she died of a stroke at 58. The state buried her with full honors. The official record remembers Lyudmila Pavlichenko as a Soviet sniper and a hero of the Soviet Union, credited with 309 confirmed kills. Outside the Soviet Union, the Cold War dimmed her fame. Inside it, she became a legend, taught in schools, turned into characters in books and films. But the practical truth of what she had changed, the tactical innovation, the willingness to break rules in order to save comrades, was often lost amid slogans and icons. Today, elements of her approach live on in modern sniper doctrine. Many armies study the lessons she proved in battle, even if they don't always name her. If you ever see the Mosin Nagant on display at the Central Museum of the Armed Forces in Moscow, her rifle behind glass, personalized marks still visible on the stock, the image beside it tells the rest. In the photograph, she's 24, standing in ruins, a rifle in her hands and an unyielding look in her eyes. That look, tired, stubborn, steady, is the truest record of what she left behind. Not just a tally of kills, but a story of someone who refused to be prey, who chose to change the rules when those rules were killing her people. History remembers the numbers. The more important memory is the decision, to risk everything on a tactic the manuals condemned, because the manuals were costing lives. That choice transformed doctrine, saved lives, and left a complicated legacy. A woman who fought, innovated, mourned, and ultimately helped redefine how armies think about snipers. Feminist writers point to her as proof women can excel in combat. Russian nationalists call her a patriotic icon. But very few truly understand what she did. Lyudmila didn't just shoot Germans. She changed how snipers fight. She proved aggression could beat skill, that psychological warfare mattered as much as marksmanship, and that sometimes the only way to survive was to make yourself the target. Her techniques, decoys, dual nests baiting the hunter, are standard in modern sniper training today. The U.S. Marine Corps Scout Sniper School teaches variations of her methods. The British SAS includes her tactics in counter-sniper doctrine. The Israeli Defense Forces study her engagements in urban warfare. None of them mention her name. None give her credit. The tactics live on, divorced from their creator. But if you visit the Central Museum of the Armed Forces in Moscow, you can see it, her Mosin Nagant rifle. The rifle she used for all 309 confirmed kills. Glass case plaque reads, Junior Lieutenant Lyudmila Pavlichenko, deadliest female sniper in history. Her adjustments, the scope she calibrated, the stock carved with her initials, all still there. Beside it, a photograph of Lyudmila at 24, standing in ruins in Odessa, rifle in hand, eyes staring at the camera. Tired, determined, unbroken. That photograph is her real legacy, not propaganda, not medals, not the 309 confirmed kills. Her legacy is in her eyes, a woman who refused everything because the rules were killing her friends. That's how survival happens in war. Not by following orders, not by doing what you were supposed to do, but by deciding to act differently when it matters most. Lyudmila used herself as bait to kill 309 Germans, and almost nobody knows her name. But now you do.